Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome back to our study in the book of Esther. We left off with Esther inviting Haman and the king to a dinner. And that's where we're going to open up in chapter 7, verse 1. It says, "So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said unto Esther, on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom." So they're at that second dinner on the second night. And he's like, okay, what is it, Esther, that you want? What is it that you're requesting? I'll give you up to half of the kingdom for it. Well, Esther actually does respond this time with, I would say with the truth, but with the real heart of the matter. What she was trying to, with the real question, right, Peter? A little bit of an inside joke. All right, so in verse 3, then Esther the queen answered and said, "If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage." So she says, save me, save the life of me and my people. Can you imagine if you're the king? Okay, just think for a second. You're having this grand dinner and all of a sudden you find out somebody wants to kill your queen? Probably pretty upset, right? Pretty angry. Well, who else is at this dinner? Haman. Who is it who's after the Jews? It's Haman. So imagine you're Haman sitting there and all of a sudden you're like, oh no, I'm in huge trouble. He's probably trying to sneak back towards the door, let me get out of here. I'm not really sure. The Bible doesn't say that. But can you imagine the emotion at this word? I don't know, boys and girls, if you've ever gotten bad news and just how the life of the party can be going on, all of a sudden you get bad news and it's silent. It's kind of that idea. It gets silent. Well, King Ahasuerus is like, who wants to do this to you? And he's getting angry and upset. Who wants to kill my queen? Well, let's see how Esther says it in verse 6. "And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen." Well, the king is so angry. It goes on to tell us in verse 7, he stands up from the banquet table. He goes outside. He is just so angry. He left the room, okay? That was probably very wise for as angry as he was at that moment. Well, Esther kind of goes to the side. It's a little different than now, boys and girls, where we sit at a table, but they had kind of couches or maybe a futon where they would kind of rest or recline after they'd eaten. Well, she goes and sits down on that. Now, the Bible does refer to it as a bed, so it's more of laying down than sitting. But she goes to sit on that, and Haman comes over, and he is just begging and pleading her. And in walks the king. So the king is already angry at Haman because Haman wants to take the life of his queen. He walks in. He now sees Haman basically over top of Esther, and he gets more angry at Haman. Verse 8 kind of reveals that for us. "And the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face." So the king comes in. He is mad. He's like, "Haman, what on earth are you doing?" And the people realize in the room, they understand what's going on, and they go and they cover up Haman's face. They're like, okay, the king doesn't want to see you anymore, which is kind of what that represented. The one I looked it up a little bit, but that's basically the king doesn't want to see you anymore. You are condemned. So they don't want the king to be angry anymore, so they have covered up the face that is angering the king. Oh, boys and girls, Haman just went from a power of position, wow, second best to the king, having these dinners with the queen, to all of a sudden he's condemned. Now that happened in just a few minutes, but boys and girls, Haman had been making poor choices for a long time. And now the judgment was coming. Haman's pride and selfishness were going to cost him dearly. What is your pride and selfishness costing you? Boys and girls, how are your selfish actions hurting others around you? Which we're going to talk about that a little bit more with the life of Haman. But boys and girls, when we make selfish decisions, it affects more than just us. So we're back in the, took a little, yeah, there we go, Peter, we got to focus, right? So we've got Haman there, his face is covered. We've got Esther there reclining. We've got the king who's furious. And there's a man standing there. His name is Harbona, one of the king's servants. And he's like, so king, Haman, he built this gallows and he was going to kill Mordecai on it. But just so you know, he has this gallows at his house. Well, boys and girls, who do you think's going to die on that gallows now? Yeah, it's not going to be Mordecai. It's going to be Haman. Verse 10, so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was pacified. And that's where chapter 7 ends, verse 10. Boys and girls, now chapter divisions are something we put in, so it's easier to find verses, but that is where we're going to cut it off. But we found out that Haman was taken care of, but boys and girls, he had sent out that decree. It was signed with the king's ring. So Esther and Mordecai aren't off the hook yet. How is the king going to be able to reverse what he said if it was signed with his ring? You have to come back next week, or you could read ahead in your Bible in Esther chapter 8. But Peter and I will